The heavy, black satin of my master's graduation gown felt less like a symbol of achievement and more like a shroud as I stood in the quiet sanctuary of my bedroom. For 2 years, I had envisioned this exact morning as a moment of pure triumph, a clean break from the exhausting cycle of survival that had defined my youth. Instead, the cold, blue light of my laptop screen illuminated a reality so grotesque that my breath caught in my throat before I could even pin my graduation cap into place. Beneath the celebratory emails and the congratulatory notifications from my university lay a silent, catastrophic alert from my professional credit monitoring service. Earlier that morning, while the rest of the house was still asleep, someone had attempted to fraudulently open a $60,000 luxury line of credit using my clean identity and my newly minted accounting credentials. The digital footprint left behind by the application did not point to a faceless cybercriminal in a distant country. It led directly to the IP address of the laptop sitting in the bedroom down the hall. My older sister, Kelly, had used my private files, my social security number, and the specialized credential codes I had earned through blood and tears to secure a lifestyle she could never afford. I didn't scream, and I didn't storm down the hallway to demand an explanation, because my rigorous training in forensic accounting had taught me that emotion is the enemy of strategy. With steady, calculated keystrokes, I immediately froze the application, flagged the attempt as identity theft, and locked down my credit profiles behind an unbreakable wall of security. As I quietly closed my laptop and adjusted my graduation tassel, I realized that the battle lines had been drawn before the sun had even fully risen on my special day. To understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, you have to understand the brutal, unforgiving road I had to walk just to stand on that graduation stage. While my peers spent their college years enjoying campus life and weekend parties, my existence was a relentless, punishing blur of double shifts and sleepless nights. I worked 40 hours a week as a nighttime auditor for a local logistics firm, scrubbing financial data until my eyes burned under the harsh fluorescent lights. As soon as my shift ended at dawn, I would change my clothes in a cramped gas station bathroom and rush to the university to attend back-to-back graduate seminars. My textbooks were stained with coffee and tears, and my fingers were perpetually calloused from typing out endless case studies on financial ethics and corporate tax law. In stark contrast to my grueling routine, my family lived a completely parasitic lifestyle, treating my hard work as a communal resource meant to fund their absolute laziness. My parents had long since stopped working regular jobs, choosing instead to live off high-interest personal loans and the steady stream of cash they guilted me into providing. Kelly was even worse, floating through life with an unearned sense of luxury, driving a car she couldn't afford, and passing her bad financial habits down to her 14-year-old son, Tyler. They looked down on my ambition, constantly mocking my late nights and telling me that my accounting degree was a waste of time compared to Kelly's mysterious online business ventures. Every time I tried to establish a boundary or refuse a financial request, my mother would weep and accuse me of abandoning the family that had raised me. Out of a misplaced sense of duty, I had allowed myself to become their financial safety net, co-signing their loans and allowing them access to my auxiliary accounts just to keep the peace. But as I drove myself to the graduation ceremony that afternoon, the crushing weight of the morning's discovery settled deep into my bones, hardening into an unbreakable resolve. The university commencement ceremony went by in a haze of speeches and applause, a beautiful moment that was completely overshadowed by the storm brewing beneath the surface. Afterward, we gathered at an upscale downtown restaurant where I had reserved a large table to celebrate my achievement with my university friends, mentors, and professors. My family arrived nearly 40 minutes late, boisterous and completely disrespectful of the elegant atmosphere, immediately ordering the most expensive items on the menu without a second thought. I watched quietly as Kelly preened in front of my academic colleagues, loudly lying about her own professional achievements, while my parents nodded in smug approval. The real tension began to build when the waitstaff brought out the centerpiece of the celebration, a massive, custom-ordered tiered cake that my university friends had surprised me with. The cake was a beautiful work of art, decorated with a miniature fondant graduation cap and meticulous script that read, "Congratulations to Rachel, Master of Accounting." As my friends leaned forward with their cameras raised, capturing the joy of the moment, I noticed a subtle, malicious nod pass between Kelly and her son, Tyler. Tyler, a boy who had been trained by his mother to believe that rules did not apply to him, suddenly stood up from his chair with an aggressive, uncoordinated movement. Before anyone could react, he reached across the table and deliberately shoved his entire forearm into the base of the custom cake, flipping the top tiers directly onto my lap. The white frosting and heavy sponge cake splattered across my graduation dress, ruining the delicate fabric and sending a shocked, suffocating silence through the upscale dining room. My university friends gasped in horror, their cameras freezing midair as they stared at the absolute ruin of the celebratory centerpiece. I sat entirely still, the cold weight of the frosting soaking through my clothes, my eyes locked instantly on Tyler's face. The boy didn't look remorseful or startled. Instead, his eyes immediately darted toward Kelly, seeking the silent validation of a job well done. That was when the cruel, mocking laughter of my parents broke the heavy silence of the restaurant, shattering any lingering hope I had for my family. "It's just a cake, Rachel," my father bellowed, waving his hand dismissively as he took another sip of his expensive wine. "Don't start crying and ruin the mood over a little sugar. You always take yourself entirely too seriously with your fancy titles," my mother chimed in, a nasty, sharp giggle escaping her lips. Tyler was just trying to have a little fun. Kelly sat back in her chair, a smug, venomous smile spreading across her features as she watched me look down at my ruined graduation attire. In that precise, agonizing moment, the puzzle pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity, revealing the true depth of the malice sitting across from me. The cake-flipping incident wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just a case of a poorly behaved teenager acting out in a public space. It was a highly calculated, petty act of revenge orchestrated entirely by Kelly as a direct retaliation for the line of credit I had frozen earlier that morning. She had realized her fraudulent financial scheme was blocked, and since she couldn't steal my future, she had decided to humiliate me in front of the people I respected most. My friends looked at my family with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, the toxic dynamic of my household laid completely bare before the university community. I took a deep breath, picking up a cloth napkin and calmly wiping a smear of frosting from my wrist, my voice steady and deadly quiet when I finally spoke. "Excuse me for a moment," I said to my friends, standing up from the table with a grace that completely defied the mess on my clothes. "I need to take care of something." I walked out of the main dining room, ignoring my mother's loud sigh of irritation, and found a quiet alcove near the restaurant's executive offices. I pulled my smartphone from my purse, my fingers moving with a cold, professional precision that felt entirely mechanical. The time for emotional negotiation had officially ended. It was time to deploy the full force of the financial knowledge I had sacrificed my youth to obtain. I logged into my secure banking portal, initiating a high-stakes dramatic sequence that would systematically strip my family of every single financial luxury they possessed. I began with the primary checking account, a legacy joint account that my parents used to automatically pull their monthly rent and utility payments from. With 3 swift clicks, I decoupled my name from the account, transferring my personal balance into a secure, private corporate entity I had established weeks prior. Next, I moved to the credit cards, specifically the Platinum Auxiliary cards that I had foolishly issued to Kelly and my father as authorized users for emergencies. I revoked their authorization codes one by one, watching the digital status bars switch from a vibrant green to a stark, locked crimson. I didn't stop there. I opened my master account with the national telecommunications provider and terminated the 3 additional lines on my family data plan, scheduling the cutoff for midnight. The final, most devastating blow required me to call my logistics firm's legal department to revoke the co-signature agreement on my parents' luxury SUV. Because they had missed 3 consecutive payments that I had quietly covered to protect my own credit score, my revocation would trigger an immediate default notice to the lender. I stood in that quiet alcove for 15 minutes, completely dismantling the parasitic ecosystem that had drained my energy and resources for years. When I walked back into the dining room, I didn't return to the table. Instead, I approached the restaurant manager, paid the entire bill for my friends, and walked straight out the front door. As my car pulled away from the curb, leaving my family stranded at the restaurant with frozen credit cards and deactivated phones, a profound sense of freedom washed over me. The realistic domino effect of that afternoon's choices began to unfold over the next 2 years with the inexorable force of a natural disaster. When my family realized that their automated financial safety net had completely vanished, their initial reaction was one of blinding fury and aggressive entitlement. My phone was bombarded with dozens of frantic, threatening voicemails from Kelly and my mother, screaming that I was an ungrateful monster who was trying to kill them. I didn't respond to a single message, choosing instead to route all family communications through a certified legal intermediary who handled identity theft cases. Without my income to subsidize their profound laziness, the fragile house of cards they had built on borrowed time began to collapse under its own weight. Within 90 days, the luxury SUV was publicly repossessed from my parents' driveway in broad daylight, the neighbors watching as the vehicle was hooked onto a tow truck. Kelly's unearned lifestyle vanished overnight as collection agencies began hounding her for the massive debts she had accumulated under her own name over the years. They were forced to downsize from their suburban rental home into a cramped, run-down 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial edge of the city. For the first time in their entire lives, true financial accountability slammed into them, forcing my parents to take low-wage retail jobs just to afford groceries. Kelly was forced to face the reality of her own choices, her credit score ruined and her reputation shattered as the fraud report I filed remained a permanent black mark on her record. I watched this collapse from a distance, receiving occasional updates from my legal counsel while I built a highly successful career at a top-tier accounting firm in the city. I bought my own apartment, filled my life with genuine, supportive friends, and finally allowed myself to heal from the decades of emotional manipulation. 2 years after that fateful graduation day, an invitation arrived in my mail for a younger cousin's wedding, a family event I initially intended to skip entirely. But my therapist had reminded me that true closure doesn't mean running away from the past. It means standing before it as a person who can no longer be hurt by it. The wedding reception was held in a beautifully lit rustic barn, the air filled with the sweet scent of autumn flowers and the sound of a live string quartet. I sat near the back of the room, elegant and composed in an emerald green silk dress, sipping a glass of champagne as I watched the family dynamics from afar. My parents looked significantly older, the sharp edges of their arrogance softened by 2 years of hard, physical labor and genuine financial struggle. During a quiet moment when the rest of the guests were dancing, my father slowly separated himself from the crowd and walked toward my table, his posture hesitant. He didn't look at me with the smug disdain he had displayed at the restaurant. His eyes were heavy with a deep, exhausting sorrow. "Can I sit down, Rachel?" he asked, his voice rough and entirely devoid of the booming authority he used to project so easily. I nodded quietly, setting my champagne glass down on the table as he pulled out the wooden chair opposite me. We sat in silence for a long moment, the music from the dance floor filtering through the space between us like a barrier from the rest of the world. "I wanted to say that I'm sorry, Rachel," he whispered, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on the white tablecloth. "I am so deeply sorry for what we did to you. When your mother and I were forced to work those long shifts at the warehouse just to pay for our medication, I finally understood what we put you through. We spent years watching you destroy your health to support us, and instead of protecting you, we allowed Kelly to treat you like a personal ATM. We laughed when Tyler ruined your day because we were bitter that you were escaping the misery we had created for ourselves, and that is a shame I will carry to my grave." I looked at my father, searching his face for any sign of the old manipulation, but I found only the raw, broken truth of a man who had finally grown up too late. "Thank you for saying that, Dad," I replied, my voice calm, peaceful, and entirely free of the anger that had once consumed me. "I appreciate the apology, but I cannot come back to the family." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes as he accepted the finality of my boundary without an argument, realizing that forgiveness did not mean access. As he stood up and walked away, a shadow fell over the table, and I looked up to see a tall, lean teenager standing where my father had just been. It was Tyler, now 16 years old, his demeanor completely transformed from the entitled, malicious child who had flipped my graduation cake. His clothes were modest, his hair was neatly cut, and the arrogant smirk that had once defined his face had been replaced by a quiet, humbler maturity. "Aunt Rachel," he said softly, his hands tucked nervously into his pockets as he looked at me with an expression of genuine remorse. "My mother told me not to talk to you tonight, but I didn't care because I needed to look you in the eyes and apologize for what I did at the restaurant. I was just a kid, but I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I let my mom use me to hurt you because I wanted her to think I was loyal to her. Since we lost the house and everything fell apart, I've had to get a job at a grocery store to help pay for our food, and I realize now how hard you worked for us. You didn't deserve what we did to you, and I promise you that I am trying to become a better man than the people who raised me." The apology was completely unforced, a beautiful, bittersweet testament to the fact that sometimes the destruction of a toxic environment is the only way to save the next generation. I stood up from my chair, stepping forward and placing a gentle, reassuring hand on my nephew's shoulder, a tear finally escaping my own eye. "I forgive you, Tyler," I said softly, looking deeply into his eyes. "Keep working hard, keep choosing the truth, and build a life that you can be proud of on your own terms." He smiled, a genuine, relieved expression that washed the lingering shadows from his face, before he turned and walked back toward the reception hall. As I drove back to my city apartment that night, the autumn wind rushing through the open windows, a profound sense of closure settled deep into my heart. My family had destroyed their relationship with me in their desperate, greedy attempt to protect a lifestyle of laziness and entitlement. But in doing so, they had been forced to face the very reality they had spent their entire lives running away from, finding a piece of their own humanity in the struggle. People always say that home is where your family is, a beautiful sentiment that is meant to remind us of unconditional love and blood connections. But as I unlocked the door to my beautiful, peaceful apartment, stepping into a life I had built entirely with my own integrity, I knew a much deeper truth. Home isn't a place defined by a shared last name, a genetic code, or the obligation to endure abuse in the name of loyalty. Home is where your boundaries are honored, where your hard work is valued, and above all else, home is where you are respected.